already starting to say, because of our demographics, we've gotten very old as a society and we're getting older very fast. And you all know what's happened to fertility for the last, since the early 90s. Last year we're down to 1.67. So in 18 years, the United States has more deaths than births. Half the states today already have more deaths than births. So you start to say, okay, we're going to be at 1.8. There was a couple projections for next year. We're a little higher than that. If we just shaved off another 0.5%, and then I have folks running around here saying, look at our pretend budget. We can balance in 10 years. We can. Absurd. The borrowing this year. Have you seen the numbers? You realize now you don't do budgeting this way. We have a fiscal year, but year to date, so if you do a 12-month cycle, we have now borrowed $2.1 trillion this year, and that does not have the backfill of all the extraordinary measures that just are getting done right now, as now the debt ceiling has been raised. $2.1 trillion is more than all defense and all discretionary, meaning everything you think of as government, the FBI, the White House, the Supreme Court, the State Department, all of it. All of government is functionally living on borrowed money. We weren't supposed to hit that until for about 9 more years. And we've already hit it this year. So why this board? Look, I hope this is wrong. I desperately, desperately hope these numbers are wrong. But this was Bloomberg Intelligence. Two of their lead economists saying, when you put in these factors of the cuts in spending, which we have to do, but you got to deal with the reality that it does slow down the economy, the higher interest rate costs, the dramatic increase in the utilization of health care, particularly in Medicare and Medicaid, but mostly Medicare, 130% of debt to GDP, that's 9 budget years from now. I beg of someone, pull out your calculator, put some batteries in it, and do a little math experiment for me. If you had 130% of debt to GDP, if today publicly held debt is, let's call it 25, 26 trillion, that's publicly held. That's where you haven't been borrowing from the trust funds, publicly held. You had to go to markets. That's doubling publicly held debt. So let's say it's 51 trillion. You can almost do that math in your head if you said you had a 5% strike rate, which is high. That's well over $2 trillion a year. $2 trillion a year just in financing costs. 9 years from now, the interest cost is functionally equal to every dime you and I think of as government. We were not supposed to hit that for like 15, 18 years. With the higher interest rates, the increased cost of health care, the fact that economy does not look like it's going to grow much more than a point, if we even hit the consensus number of a 1.7, 1.8, 9 years, $2 trillion a year in financing costs. I hope it's absolutely wrong. I hope our projection on interest rates is way off. But this is coming off the Bloomberg model. These aren't slackers. These are some of the best in the world at analytics. So let's go to something that was more optimistic. Moody's Analytics. So it's Bloomberg Intelligence, Moody's Analytics. Their number was much more optimistic. So instead of being at 114% of debt to GDP functionally in 9 budget years, they had it as 121% of debt to GDP. And all understand, we're supposed to be at 114. Even Moody's has a few points above that, meaning we will have broken through the debt to GDP more than the World War II. Just the financing costs, let alone the drag on the economy, because this government, in trying to finance all this spending, and it's, well, we'll come back to where the spending's coming from, is going to consume much of the world's capital. We don't have a high enough savings rate in the United States to have an economy that grows and to finance these. So we're going to have to reach out all over the world and grab stunning amounts of capital. How much discussion have any of us heard this week, last week, the week before that, behind these microphones about dramatically changing the cost of health care? Because when the president got behind that microphone during the State of the Union and said, you're not allowed to talk about Social Security, even though in 9 years the trust fund is gone, and we double senior poverty. So if you're on Social Security, understand, start planning for it, because we've made it radioactive here to even have an honest conversation about it. In 9 years, you take a 25% cut in your check, therefore we're going to double senior poverty. And that's the morality of the State of the Union we had. You're not allowed to talk about it. We won't cut, we won't touch it, by not working on it. Well, how about Medicare? The Medicare Trust Fund is also gone in this window. And the Medicare Trust Fund only pays for, 40, I'll be generous, 40%, because it's mostly the hospital portion. The rest comes right out of the general fund. So please understand, when you read something like that, and CBO was over here originally before the debt ceiling agreement at 119% of GDP. They brought it down to 114. And then the other analysts are saying, yeah, but you haven't calculated the cost of higher interest. You haven't calculated the fact that as you're trying to start to slow down the growth of spending, you actually slow down the economy. And the healthcare costs are going off the charts. But we're terrified to get behind these microphones and tell the public the truth. So one more time, an oldie but a goodie, and I will make a new slide one of these days. People don't get their head around the vast majority. Don't look at the 1965 date. This is 2022. 71% of all spending in 2022 was just Medicare, Social Security, what we call entitlements. They're earned benefits. Some are not earned. Some you get because you're part of certain groups or certain incomes. Defense was about 13%, meaning the rest of the discretionary is 16. We actually took some of that off. You couldn't negotiate on it. So when we were doing our negotiations, we were down to 11% of the budget. This red part of the pie grows and grows and grows. Everything else is flat. This consumes us.